Today I'm speaking with two grumpy old men, Michael Anderson and Brian Bonner, who are seasoned Ukraine watchers and experts. They have teamed up to create a video Substack blog, Two Grumpy Old Men on Ukraine. Of course, they focus on that and related issues, especially as Russian aggression is now unfolding on a global scale. There is plenty for them to dissect and discuss. Both of my guests have lived and worked in many countries and are prodigious in terms of the creation and the writing that they do on Ukraine. We're going to put links in the description of the video to some of those materials. I strongly advise you to check them out and subscribe to their channels. Welcome to Silicon Curtain Podcast. Please, if you like this video at the end, definitely hit that button. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss any of the materials. And I'd like to say a huge thank you to everybody who supports the channel and the work that I do on it through Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee. It's incredibly important. As you'll probably guess, it does take quite a bit of my time, approaching 100% to actually sort of produce the channel and keep it going. But I think it's never been more important. And with that, let's turn to my two guests. This does feel like a pivot point. It does feel like a critical time to remain firm on support for Ukraine.
I would certainly agree. I think this past week of young Mr. Zelenskyy going and being in Washington has been incredibly important politically, and I would say to do with Ukraine's image in America and around the world. I think it's been a very important week. We've written a lot about it. Of course, I would support what you just said, Jonathan, for people to go and have a look at your cast podcast, and I would also hope that people would come on ours, not just because we put out some brilliant analysis, but actually because a lot of the comments to our published analysis really illustrate the fight in America, how important Ukraine has become and how Ukraine is being used by both sides, but obviously primarily by Mr. Trump in this election campaign. So you can learn a lot about the atmosphere, the political atmosphere, by reading the comments to our pieces. Actually, it's been a bit of an eye opener to see some of the aggression thrown at us when we publish something that's vaguely pro-Ukrainian. So yeah, I agree with you. It's been a very important week.
I would say that the week for Ukraine was not great. We still, if you look at the cold hard facts, you still have nowhere close to the funding that's needed. And I think most people agree with the economist Timothy Ashes that Ukraine needs $100 billion a year to stay in the fight. This is military, financial, everything, and $150 billion to win the fight. And there's nowhere near that. In fact, next year there is already an unfunded deficit of $15 billion, as we know. And the things that were, and I don't know where that money is going to come from, because politically, if you would get to the political, I mean, the Trump visit was predictable. He was narcissistic. Yes, he used Zelenskyy for a photo op, and he completely, devoted his time to praising Zelenskyy for not criticizing the 2019 phone call in which Trump tried to extort, an investigation from Zelenskyy and Ukrainian authorities in exchange for money, in exchange for weapons. And he apparently was not wowed by the victory plan. He said he wanted the war over as soon as possible, and that means surrender. So that's bad. On the White House front, Zelenskyy presented the victory plan, and instead of fast action or praise, Biden basically said, well, we'll hand this off to my aides and your aides, and then we'll talk about this. So unless Biden, has a strong, courageous streak at the end and allows Ukraine these deep strikes into Russian territory, bringing risk, it's hard to see how a lot is going to change here. That's my short take on the visit. Also, I would note that the fact that House Speaker Mike Johnson did not bother to meet with Zelenskyy is a very, very bad sign. And the fact that the political that the Republicans decided to gin up a political issue around the visit to Pennsylvania, which did look like it was trying to help Democrats. And I mean, Ukraine has every reason to want Democrats in probably, but they are trying to court Trump because of his unpredictability might work their way. But the White House, I think, rightly pointed out that Zelenskyy earlier this year went to Utah with Republican officials and that this was a bogus issue. But it shows you that Ukraine is still going to be one of these issues in the campaign, and the Republicans and the Democrats are taking two very different positions on this.
Well, there's a couple of things to come from that. What strikes me, and seeing a lot of the chat amongst pro-Ukrainian Republicans, the sort of chat groups that I'm part of, I can see that the optics of it are not brilliant. In fact, I mean, as a photo call, it was fantastic seeing the shells being made. It's the direct link to the war. It emphasized the importance that manufacturing is essentially saving Ukrainian lives and saving Ukraine from being overrun. So that's kind of important. There's two things that arise. One is, where is the PR and management on the Ukrainian side of the optics and the comms? Because there seem to be sort of numerous blunders. And even though they're quite sort of small, and even though we ought to be bigger than picking holes in that because Ukraine is fighting for its survival, nonetheless, there does seem to be a repeated set of sort of minor lapses in this kind of sort of communication strategy. But on the other side, I mean, this may not go down particularly well, but it strikes me that many of those who are turning this into a political issue are exhibiting the political sophistication of toddlers. They are, in many ways, unbelievably pathetic and needy, and lack any of the maturity that we might have had from, say, the Second World War generation or those in the 50s and 60s who fought the Cold War. These are not serious people.
Well, I mean, that's, the U.S. politics has degenerated into a blood sport. Now it's just about keeping power, and whatever you see, there is a lot. The Republicans are tapping into widespread, I guess, and actually creating widespread disenchantment with U.S. support for Ukraine, when actually they should be explaining why the world is going to become a much more dangerous place if Russia prevails in Ukraine, and that Ukraine prevailing could bring us a big peace dividend akin to the post Cold War, where China, Iran, and North Korea and others are deterred from undertaking these war crimes, this aggression that Russia is doing. But they're taking the irresponsible route, and they're after populist sentiment, and they're not trying to educate the public. They're trying to play on the public's ignorance and fears. Actually, I mean, I'm just running into people on the street who basically take Russia's position, who say, well, how would you feel if Russia put armies in Mexico? Or if Harris is in, then the Baltics will have war and it'll spread all over Europe. If Harris is in, wow, that's really, there's some really twisted logic. And the people I talked to, granted, were not the smartest people. They don't follow the war, but they have opinions. And these are people who vote in different societies. So it's disheartening. I should say that we don't know. I mean, Harris, I was surprised that Zelenskyy, before his trip, was so forceful in criticizing Trump and J.D. Vance. I thought, oh my God, that's not going to play well. I mean, I understand where he's coming from. You got to understand, this is a very thin field. I mean, I know Makarova. She the ambassador, Ukraine's ambassador to Washington, and she probably didn't think she was walking into this. Should she have known? Yes, she should have known by now. But these are officials that are 3 years into a war, and they are pretty stressed out, and they're making, I think, some mistakes. And I think they could have covered their covered their position by making sure Republicans in great numbers were along to the Pennsylvania munitions plant.
You say this thing that, we should not really criticize the Zelensky administration. I actually think we should. I think part of being, let's call it pro-Ukrainian, so, all of us who do not agree with Putin just mowing over a country, I think we should be allowed, and I think it's important in a democracy, and I consider Ukraine a democracy, and I consider my own connection to Ukraine to be a democratic one. I think they made some, rookie mistakes. I think his so-called victory plan, the more he talked about it, the less other people talk about it, which is always a bad sign, as Brian said. Biden, Harris didn't really, they alluded to it and say, yeah, we'll discuss it. I thought his slightly strange conception that he was demanding NATO membership for Ukraine in the month of November, which was leaked by people who work in the Zelensky administration and have worked there. I thought that was bizarre. I mean, it's like, I agree, it would be lovely, but I also agree it would be lovely if you paid me $1 million for this interview. There's not a snowman chance in hell it's going to happen. And in November, and also like Biden cannot give Ukraine and Zelensky NATO membership. Biden doesn't run NATO, so I don't know. This seems to me to be, completely off mark. Then there were all the faults in, this visit maybe and so on. And now, of course, the problem here is that now the Republicans, as we've just seen, are going to make a big song and dance out of it, and it'll have mileage. And they are not doing it because maybe they don't really give a toss about Ukraine. They're doing it, of course, because they can make political hay of it in the US. Also, when we talk about this week, I think the absolutely most important thing was Trump's painful repetition of Ukraine is gone, Ukrainian is dead, it's being demolished. As a person who feel a lot for that country, I spent 2 days just watching these repetitions out of his mouth. It was painful. And I cannot even imagine what it would be like to be a Ukrainian person, maybe a refugee, maybe somebody who's lost people, and hear this person repeating with this kind of tone, like he was almost enjoying it. And I thought that was disgusting at a personal level, and I thought it was really frightening. And then I don't remember the last time I've seen an American top leader. I mean, he's the next president. He hopes to be the next president as well. To talk about what is officially a close ally in this demeaning way, I thought that was horrible, to be quite honest.
In comments on my channel from Vatniks, trolls, and bots, who are literal Russian agents. So what conclusion are we to draw from that? So, Brian?
Well, I mean, I would step back. One, I hope I made the point. We don't know what Harris is going to do. I expect nothing but caution, unfortunately, from Biden, because I don't think he wants to do anything to upset Harris's chances to win. And, you can play this back if I'm wrong again about Trump's election chances, but I see Kamala Harris winning still, but I don't know, really. Do you know what she's going to do? I don't know. I think the overlooked story of the week came from Czech President Petr Pavel, who I respect a lot. I mean, I think he's widely respected in a global community. And he basically, there's some friends of Ukraine who are putting their hand around Zelensky's shoulder, metaphorically, saying, buddy, you haven't got what it takes to achieve your goals, and you're probably not going to get there. So there's a lot of talk about Plan B, which is basically, I think it was outlined by The Economist. I got to give them credit in their leader, which is saying, let's take Ukraine where it is now, the territory it controls, into NATO, into the EU, as fast as possible. We'll deal with reunification later. It's very difficult because there's still a disconnect between the Ukrainian goals and the means to achieve them. And I have to say this, and this is just as somebody who loves Ukraine and who lives in Ukraine, and I think, by the way, winter is going to be hard, but Ukraine, as always, is going to pull through it. But we are a crippled nation. I mean, in terms of our electrical capacity and other things. But I have to say that, I mean, let's step back and look at the bigger picture. Russia is moving to a war footing. Okay, as much as I would like them to collapse, as Vladimir Putin to be overthrown, to be, tried for war crimes, I don't see that happening, because sanctions, as we can see, even if they're as tight as a drum in the West, he's still got allies in the other part of the world, which will keep them going. So I don't see the economy collapsing or him starving. On Ukraine's side, big corruption got Ukraine into this. I don't see, and the Ukrainians don't see any evidence that there is a lessening of it, except perhaps, and most importantly, in the defense sector. I think that money I hope that money is being well spent. It looks like it is, but on corruption, we're not going to know, because Ukraine went into the war without functioning institutions. That's one thing. And as far as the war footing, Ukraine is not on the war footing. 3 years into the war, we still have a conscription age at 25. This is not what countries who are facing a war for their survival do. And the manpower shortages and the training shortages are being brought out more regular basis. I would point to a Financial Times article last week, basically, and many other articles recently, saying that in the troop rotation to less experienced troops, this is how Ukraine is losing the ground. And I think almost every military analyst I've read about or talked to said Ukraine does not currently have enough to get back all of its territory, and is barely have enough to hold the line, as we can see on land. And finally, I mean, people are voting with their feet, unfortunately. I mean, it was one thing to leave the war in the early days out of safety, but 6 million, including a million, and we don't know the exact numbers because people come and go all the time, including 1 million fighting age men, are still abroad. That is a huge problem for a country, and the longer they stay abroad, the more likely they will remain abroad. And I think that's a huge problem for the demographics of the country, for the morale of the country, and for the willingness, the ability to prevail. And I don't want to, I'll end on an optimistic note, saying, going back to the Economist editorial, which is basically, if Ukraine is taken as it is into NATO and the EU, fast-tracked, if it gets enough domestic weapons production to defend itself in the future, and air defenses and so forth, and is able to entice people back, then we can see the short-term future that is not catastrophic, and has some bright spots.
It's interesting, because I do hear voices sort of echoing some of that, and some of this thinking seems to prevail within the EU as well, amongst those who would describe themselves as extremely pro-Ukraine, and who I would say have extremely realistic views of the threat posed by Russia. Now, if that was to happen, if the lines of contact were to be frozen, it seems that Putin is pushing for something like that, has been for some time, albeit, he's going to push for more than he has. He's going to make unreasonable demands. We know that. But if, let's say, the lines of contact were frozen, that plan would only work if the West really stepped up, as you say, immediately to take the unoccupied territories into NATO, to pump vast amounts of money into the Ukraine, the fledgling Ukrainian defense industry, which actually has far more capacity than it has funds to produce. They could be producing, 5 times more artillery pieces, 10 times more drones, etc., with the correct financing. And I would argue this 300 billion would need to be handed over as a down payment on Russian reparations for the damage. But what are the chances of all these things happening with the speed that you describe? Because if these things don't happen, then they're a red rag to a bull. Russia will interpret our weakness and our slowness as a green light for a new invasion.
Chances are low based on current behavior, I would agree. And I agree with you on all those points. If that did happen, we could. The problem is Putin needs to pay for this aggression in every way. And I don't see any evidence that he's being forced to pay. He seems emboldened. I still, you've talked about this many times, I know, on your program. The combined power of the West is so vastly superior to Russia and its allies that it boggles the mind that the support, while significant, is not enough.
Done quite a few films about similar situations. About contact lines between Russian occupied areas and what is left of the country. For example, in Georgia, Abkhazia, and South Ossetia. And I have to say, I have great difficulty to see that working. If you take Ukraine as it is now, so to speak, under Ukrainian control, into NATO, first and foremost, it will not be immediate. This will take a long, long time. When we say fast track, it's not by Christmas. There will be lots of experts. There will be a lot of politicians. In the EU so far, for example, you cannot take anybody in unless every country in the union agrees, and I doubt Mr. Orban will agree to that, and others will have doubts. But also the actual physical, concrete line of contact, that would just be a confrontation line. What does it mean that Ukraine is a part of NATO? Does that mean that we're going to have like American and Danish soldiers standing on that line with what will be de facto Russia? Or do we imagine some kind of peacekeeping come in, again, going to, for example, to what I've seen in Abkhazia? It was just provocations from both sides, from the Georgian side, but mainly from the Abkhaz side. And we all know how that ended. However much I love my Ukrainian friends and colleagues, there is now millions of men who have been trained in fighting and who have weapons. There's a lot of weapons around. Ukrainians have a very long and very proud tradition of partisan fighting. I simply cannot see that being a realistic purpose as it looks now. To be honest, I just can't see how that will work. It just seems to me, as many Ukrainians say, that we need to get Russia out of our country, otherwise we are just delaying the next Russian attack.
And let's turn back to Trump, because we have to be realistic, even though there seems to be a degree of hubris on the Democrats' side, an assumption of victory. That is by no means a done deal. In fact, the results would seem to be on a knife edge. And any provocation or unexpected event could potentially swing that vote. And we know that Russia is very good at provocations. It's very good at engineering terrorist acts. It's the 25th anniversary of the Moscow apartment bombings. There seems to be a very dangerous complacency going into November, given that the race is sort of neck and neck. And those who are, let's say, suspicious of Russia, cynical about Russia, it's my belief that Putin will activate all his agents, all his assets, all his useful idiots in the West, all the tenet medias that we don't yet know about, but that may be combined with all sorts of extraordinary terroristic acts. We have a fertilizer ship, a ship containing ammonium nitrate that is drifting around the coast of the United Kingdom. That is 7 times more of that chemical that took out the entire port area of Beirut. Now, that might not have set out with the intention to become a bomb, but as Putin realizes that he can place coercion, pressure, and use terror to coerce the West, now is the time that I think these things will happen if he is minded to try and swing a Trump vote. Is this being alarmist, or should we be far less complacent than we seem to be in the West?
We should be far less complacent. It is World War III, in a manner of speaking, and we've obviously not caught up. But let's say Trump wins. According to Europe, they're still going to take care of Ukraine. That they're still going to support Ukraine, well, regardless of what the U.S. does or not. Is that comforting to you, Jonathan, Michael?
No. No. I mean, the intention might be there, but the speed and bureaucracy is, means stuff will not get delivered in a timely fashion. I know I'm supposed to be asking the questions, but yeah, you threw the question back at me. And of course, then you have Russian agents at the heart of NATO and the EU, such as Viktor Orban, who this week, his ambassador or one of his officials, in an extraordinary answer to a journalist's question, said that said that Hungary would not resist Russian aggression, would not sacrifice its people and its cities, and they would simply sort of lay down and let it happen to them. I mean, this is an extraordinary indication, I think, of what Putin perhaps believes he could get away with or understands he could get away with in Europe.
Well, we need to be on guard here. I think one of the biggest things I see in Western policy, Western foreign policy, is that we're very often hysterical. And this is what when Trump uses those words that Ukraine is gone, is demolished, he's painting this very, very dramatic image. And Brian, who lives in Kiev, can tell us this is absolutely not true, that Ukraine is completely demolished. There's nothing that Trump used this horrible sentence when he said, there is nothing for the refugees, the Ukrainian refugees abroad. There's nothing for you to return to. I mean, imagine you're sitting abroad and you're hearing this orange twat talking like that. That's horrible. But he is politically clever. Whatever we think of him, we need to wake up and realize that both Putin and Trump are very clever with these images. And this image that Trump puts in people's head is a dramatic and hysterical image. I want to draw attention to how we looked at Iraq and how particularly we treated Afghanistan, how quickly we can change. We all hated the Taliban. We took over Afghanistan. We were going to turn them into a new Denmark, Sweden, whatever. Everything was great. We found this Karzai guy. He was absolutely lovely. We paraded him around. He was in the White House. He was in the Danish Red. Everybody loved the guy. He was sweet. He spoke some kind of English. He could smile. Oh, great. And then it turned out that he was pretty corrupt. And in a few years, it all turned upside down. He was corrupt. We shouldn't help Afghanistan. And now look what happened to Afghanistan, how quickly and dramatic we came out of Afghanistan. And I'm really worried that we are going to be as hysterical if Ukraine starts to slip just a little bit. There will be all these people, all these politicians on the right wing mainly, but also some on the crazy left wing popping up saying, look, it's a lost cause. We shouldn't help them. There's nothing we can do. These people will, as we heard about Yugoslavia, these people have always killed each other. They will go on. It's not our war. Let's go home. Let's spend the money on hospitals in Denmark or in Kansas and whatever. And I think this is exactly what Trump is playing on to create this image. And I think Putin has proven many times this is the stuff he loves. And he will be blasting Trump's speech out as much as he can. And I'm really worried over the next 5 or 6 weeks that, as you say, Jonathan, something, dramatic is going to happen. And every time something dramatic is going to happens, it just means more and more people are going to say, yeah, we shouldn't spend our tax money on Ukraine. What do we get out of it? It's too long term. Too many people died. I hear now if you Google it, the biggest common thing today in America is like, are we going to put American boys and girls in harm's way in Ukraine? Of course we're not.
I think that the argument Republicans hawks made that Trump would not want to lose Ukraine on his watch is also got killed this week. I think what Trump will do, he made clear this week, which is that it wasn't my war. It was already lost. I came in, got rid of it. People stopped dying. So Ukraine is not an independent country. They weren't willing to fight for themselves, or, they were corrupt or whatever. And I think that's what he's going to take. So I think the Republican hawks are wrong, are guilty of wishful thinking there. As much as I'd like to believe. And again, I say this, Ukraine is far stronger. It is not in ruins. I live there. I continue to live there. It is more democratic than Russia has ever been. It is more resilient than Russia has ever been. It is less corrupt than Russia has ever been, as far as I can see from living in both countries. And there is a path to victory, but we've talked about it. It's going to take a lot of elements on both the Ukrainian side and the Western side for this to happen, but it's still possible.
No, I mean, my point was that one of the things that Trump said was a good example of this hysteria he's trying to be in tiny small sentences. When he said, Ukraine is a lost cause, it's all dead, it's all demolished. There's nothing for the refugees abroad to come back to. And I wanted to draw attention to I think it's unbelievable to have an American top politician, whether we like him or not, he's one of the two top politicians in the country, to talk about another country in that respect. I cannot imagine a Danish prime minister ever speaking about another country in that sort of totally disrespectful way. But the last point that Trump is now making in all his speeches, and it's very interesting to see he's traveling through all these swing states, he's using the same speech, and then he's adding a little bit. Sometimes it's 60 billion. Zelenskyy gets this great salesman every time he has a meeting with Biden. Next time it's 85, and I heard the hottest one I heard was 111. I don't know where he got that from, but it's sort of just mission match. But what Trump is now finishing his speeches in the swing states saying is that American moms and dads do not want their children to go and die in Ukraine. And my point was, nobody's ever suggested to have American soldiers coming to Ukraine. I mean, he's making it out like this is what Zelenskyy is cooking up with Harris. It's not. Zelenskyy and Ukrainians have never asked for that. Nobody's ever suggested that. But by throwing it out there, by lying directly, this is an outright lie. Trump is creating this dramatic image that, on the one hand, Ukraine is lost. On the other hand, look at these crazy Biden and Harris, what they're suggesting, that your kids will go and die. It's right on a knife edge at the moment. And I find it disturbing, to be honest.
I mean, this is the same guy who called Africa nations shithole countries. So, I mean, don't expect anything. The other thing, he doesn't care about facts. So he loves it when journalists sit and fact check him because he doesn't give a shit about facts. Sorry. I mean, he just doesn't care. He's after the argument. Now, about American troops and foreign troops in Ukraine, there's nobody's asking for that. Nobody's asking for that. But there are illusions. I went to the Yalta European Summit, again in Kiev with Viktor Pinchuk, the billionaire Ukrainian businessman. And he said, paraphrasing, it's a strange World War III where only Ukrainian soldiers fight. Implication, hint, that others should be involved. And I can tell you, as someone who loves and lives in Ukraine, there's no way, I mean, it may come to that, but it's not there yet. I mean, unless Ukraine is all in the war, I mean, there is a disconnect between wanting the West to be all in the war and Ukraine not willing to be all in the war. And that is a huge bridge that also needs to be mended somehow, because the disconnect needs to be removed, because there's no way foreign soldiers are going to fight when basically millions of fighting age Ukrainians are not fighting.
Yeah, and that seems to be at the heart of some of those discussions that Zelenskyy had with Zelenskyy before he was moved aside. And I think that's a sort of interesting topic. Now, to pick up on what sort of Trump says, to give him some credit, and not in a positive way, there's something that he and Putin seem to understand very, very well, and that is that morality, context, truth, empathy, even, these things actually don't matter, because with a sweep of the hand, with a bold statement, with a bold lie, supported by disinformation networks that Russia is very good at creating, you can create an alternative reality. What's happening to millions of people across millions of square miles of territory simply doesn't matter, because you can wish them out of existence in the blink of an eye with a bold lie that is amplified through digital media. They seem to have realized this. And unfortunately, they're not just isolated voices. They're tapping into something which millions and millions of people, who are not necessarily ill-intentioned people, they're not necessarily stupid people, but this works. They can distort and destroy reality and wipe out the lived experience of millions of people just with statements like this, amplified by the networks that they have worked hard to create. This is one of the challenges that we haven't really got to grips with, isn't it?
Well, I agree, but I think the credibility of Western institutions needs to be improved. I'm just talking the U.S. alone. We lost a lot of credibility. The institutions, I'm talking media, mainstream media institutions and government, in our rationale for the Iraqi and Afghanistan wars. I mean, people are not stupid. They see who goes and who fights and who gets killed and what the rationale is and what happens afterward. And, you know, America has its own problems separate from the world: education, the decline of credible media due to financing. So these things will have to be addressed. I think they still can be addressed. I mean, I still think that by and large, disinformation is not taking hold in the day, when you still see that huge majorities in America and Europe believe supporting Ukraine is an important task for democracy. So I think there all is not lost.
I agree with Brian, Jonathan, but I do want to say that we're making it way too easy for people like Trump and for people like Putin and Orban and many other people. And I think it's because we're basically failing the education of young people. I want to go back to the beginning of the war. I mean, Putin said before he rolled into Ukraine, not in 2022, but in 2014, he said he was going to go he had a duty to protect Russian speakers in Ukraine because they were being discriminated and they were being killed and so on. And so he went in and started the stuff in Crimea and in Donbass. And the amount of Western newspaper or media articles, media materials coming out saying, Russian speakers in Ukraine were in trouble, they were being oppressed and so on, was immense, by people who had absolutely no clue about life in Ukraine. I travel around in Donbass and in Crimea at that point, and I asked people up and down what is now the contact line, and nobody said anything about, everybody said to me, I can speak Russian, this is a Russian-speaking village or city. Nobody had any trouble. On top of that, of course, I would say pretty much anybody in Ukraine speaks Russian and Ukrainian fluently. So it's a political football, basically, Putin created. But our media ate it because a lot of my colleagues and Brian's colleagues didn't know anything about Ukraine. Then we had those horrible maps on very reputable services like CNN and BBC of Ukraine sort of splitting in a Ukrainian-speaking half and a Russian-speaking half. We had all these allusions to parallels to Yugoslav war, and it would split up because it was 50-50. And it's a bizarre thing to think about that 10 years ago, it was all described as a civil war. Again, pure fantasy from Putin, pure propaganda. But our media bought it. And our young people read the media and they say, oh, it's a civil war. Well, we don't want to be involved in that. So, which is one of the reasons why it took us, a new invasion from Putin to actually react and actually try to help Ukraine and protect Ukraine. So I think it goes back to education, as the British Prime Minister once said. And we are very slow, react very slowly, and people eat this kind of shite from people like Putin and Trump.
And the Azov story, the Azov Nazis stuff, which was endlessly recycled on the networks that you talk about there, Vice Media, etc. It's wonderful clickbait stuff. It fits into a commercial model because people lap that stuff up. But again, that still sticks. Even to this day, I hear and see in the comments on the channel, it's fodder for the trolls, and many people will still regurgitate it. Yes, well, of course, it's not fair what's happened to Ukraine, but what about the Azov Nazis? It's appalling.
No, it's even carrying it forward to today. Read the stories that from supposedly reputable media saying Ukraine is banning the Orthodox Church, banning a religious. No, I mean the messaging has to be better and sharper on the truth and on freedom's side. Moscow Church is an arm of the Kremlin, has supported this war. Why? What connection do they have to Christianity and God. I mean, and why would Ukraine allow Russian Kremlin propagandists to operate in their country under the guise of religion? You can hide a lot of things under religion. So I don't, obviously the West is not fighting as hard and as tough as the other side in getting its message out, and that has to be better. And part of this is the age we live in. I mean, I can't believe everybody's using Telegram now. Really, the head of Russian military intelligence just came out and said Russia has access to all your messages and your personal data, and we keep using it. I mean, really, and do the analytics. I mean, if you want to be depressed sometime, but I mean, how many people will go deep into this broadcast? Maybe yours. Everybody watches every single minute, but this is still a nation that, or a world that holds on to, news as like the shiny object and can't even remember what happened yesterday. I mean, I understand that, and that's why we have to have, going back to, and this goes back to institutional credibility, we have to have a world where we prevent wars like this, where we enforce the rules against people who start wars, and where we punish those who start wars. And, we all know the United Nations credibility is shot. How could it be credible when India, a nation of 1 billion, is not in the Security Council? When their African nation, also another 1 billion more, not in the Security Council. The United Nations does not represent the world as it is today, especially with the veto power. There has to be some limits on the veto power. And this is, again, the old order. And that includes China, the successor of the Soviet Union, the U.S., France, Great Britain, wanting to keep the old order. Well, as long as you can do that, but you're not going to, then stop writing about why you're not making any headway in the so-called global South.
That's a fantastic point. And we're always throwing about the dysfunction of the UN and how the Russians have coerced and corrupted that organization. But no, you make an absolutely sort of brilliant point there. Michael, one of the phrases that really jumped out to me that Trump said, and I'm going to say something here which some may find offensive, he puts in language that really gets our backs up. But when we look at the actual reality of it, he may not be saying something that is too different from what the other side says, what our side is saying. He talked about a fair deal for both sides, which is grotesque. Rewarding the aggressor is an obscenity. It's a moral obscenity. It's politically stupid. But how different is that actually from the reality of the policy that we've got, which is that not a single Western government has articulated what they want victory to mean and what kind of Russia they want to see at the end of this. A Russia that takes responsibility for its actions, that is not rewarded by having an economic reset. It has not been articulated, and the resources have not been provided to give Ukraine the victory, the moral and political victory that it requires to become a secure country. In reality, there is not an awful lot of difference, I would argue, when you actually dig down to the fundamental policy there. And what it comes to is that Trump does not want Russia to lose, but actually, on the other side, on our side, most of our governments also are far more worried about Russia collapsing and do not want Russia to lose. That, for them, is more important than for Ukraine to win.
I agree with you. We are in many ways, we're seeing a repeat of the breakup of the Soviet Union. I mean, we all remember the Bush the elder's speech in Kiev, the chicken Kiev speech, where he basically told the Ukrainians to calm down and stay within the Soviet Union. It wasn't really that bad. And we're seeing this now that people are sort of playing this. What was that game called? Stratego we all played 30, 40 years ago, where, moving around the world map and being a world ruler. And it seems that a lot of people are thinking about what happens if Putin falls and the slip of the tongue Freudian there, Russia breaks up. And that's disgusting. My feeling is when I hear lots of people, I mean, this is where Brian and I sometimes disagree, or where I don't go the whole mile. I actually personally do not fear that Putin is going to come and occupy Denmark or even Poland. I mean, if he cannot even, quote unquote, occupy Ukraine that almost didn't have an army in 2022, I can't see him roll in over Poland or Germany. I think we need to change in order to end this. I think we should be honest and come out and say, look, we don't think, we Danes or Germans or whatever, we don't think that Putin's going to occupy our country. We think he's going to mess it up, as he tried to do with disinformation. No, we support Ukraine for one reason. We support Ukrainians' choice in living in a free country with democracy. That's their fucking right. And we support them as good, normal human beings. We support them to the end. And the end is they need to get their country back, and they need to be put in a situation where they can decide exactly how they, and not the man in the Kremlin, how Ukrainians want to live. And I think we need to change that. Instead of all those games, we just need to come out and say, we like democracy. We like living in a democracy. Let's throw all the money and all the support of the Ukrainians, because they have decided themselves. I mean, Brian and I lived in Kiev in 2014, 2013, 14, saw these absolutely beautiful demonstrations against the corrupt regime, chugging out a corrupt regime, millions and millions of people. And no, people, this was not a CIA-sponsored coup or anything. This was literally mamas and papas and the kids and students going on the street saying, out. This was beautiful, and it was the strongest manifestation of democracy I have ever seen in my life. And I think we need to stand up and say, that's it. That is why we are supporting Ukrainians. They are like us. They want to live like us. Let's support them. Let's not do all these geopolitical games. Let's make it much more simple. And I think that is the only way we can take, the air out of Trump and Putin's balloons, where they're talking about, demolish countries and playing these games. I think we need to get it down at the person to personal level. Somebody in Kharkiv wants to live like somebody in Copenhagen or somebody in Boston. Let's help them. It's as simple as that. For me, it's a moral question to support Ukraine first and foremost. And I think we need to make that, because otherwise, I think slowly, the Ukraine fatigue, sorry for using that word, will slowly creep in, because people will listen to these bombastic statements of Trump. And I think that's the only way. We need to make it a personal question. It is a personal question. Do you want to live under Putin, or do you want to be able to express yourself and live like you want to?
And Brian, I mean, to put the question, same question in a slightly different fashion, in that respect, do our political leaders on both sides of the aisle actually prize stability and profitability above freedom? Because it seems to me their actions indicate that that is the case. And all of this sort of 3D Kissinger chess geopolitical stuff that Sullivan, that is simply a fig leaf for the fundamental truth that they do not want revolution and change that Ukraine has shown is a possibility.
I agree. I think the great sadness, it's better to have had Biden in the White House than Trump's second term. The sadness is the Jake Sullivan caution, mismanagement of the U.S. and the Western response to the war, the incremental approach has left Ukraine bleeding out and has lost a lot of its best fighters who now, other people defend that, saying Ukraine didn't have the capacity to absorb more. I don't know about that, but I do know that Ukraine has probably lost 80,000. I think that number is pretty close if you add up the official dead count, which they are not disclosing on either side, which is very suspicious on both sides, and add that up to the missing in action. So there is that unfortunate, because this is people still, the predominant sentiment is we just want this. It seems to be, without going beyond that, which most people who vote don't go beyond that. We just want this war to be over and let's just get it over with, without fully thinking through the implications. And I'm fully on board with those who say we got to push through by all means and demand the same all means possible from the West and from Ukraine to win this war. And both sides have a lot more to do. Really, the amount of money the United States has spent is trifling in its budgetary scheme and the strength of our economy. And it could be so much more. So could Europe, and so could Ukraine. I mean, they barely got through a tax hike, incremental tax hike. I mean, come on. You guys are a nation at war. Everybody in, whether it's your military or financially or whatever. And instead we see a lot of wishful thinking. I think that this is somehow, that miraculously this is where the Putin is going to collapse, and they're on the verge of being destroyed. If they lose 100,000 more soldiers, that's it. But Putin has shown that he doesn't care how many people get killed, and he's shown in his 3-year budget cycle, he's thrown 150 billion in. That's public disclosure. Probably many more billions that we don't know about into a war footing. And we all know that there's a direct connection between his military spending and his propagandizing of a military Hitler youth, Putin Hitler youth, that is underway. And so we are still not there. I hope we do get there, because I can see that domestic opinion, Ukrainians are just weary, and one by, when they leave, it's one by one, and that adds up to millions after time. And I don't want to see that happen. It's already a changed country in some ways, for the better, if it pulls through. And that's the phrase Ukrainians say a lot to me: we'll pull through. If they pull through, I think they'll pull through stronger. If they don't pull through, it will be a much weakened nation, largely with the 80% of the territory they have now. I just don't see any sentiment in Ukrainian-controlled territory to live under Russia, and Russia has demonstrated that clearly for the last 3 years what living under them is like. We still don't have a full accounting of anything, and we're probably not going to get that for years or decades.
Yeah, I just want to add what Brian says. I want to put my Danish hat on. We published a piece this week about the Danish Prime Minister, whom I'm not normally much of a fan of, but she actually went out with a very strong interview saying, we need to go full out there. And I just want to make this very concrete. Denmark spends almost 2% of our GDP, 2% of our GDP on helping and supporting Ukraine. If other countries did the same, and in this case, I want to mention that, the bigger countries, America, Germany, the UK are on 0.5%. If everybody spent 2% like the Danes, the situation would be very different.
I just wanted to, if I could, if I still had time, I'm going to the Warsaw Security Conference soon. It starts 1st and 2nd. I'll be very interested to see what is the mood there after all what's happened in America. And about smaller countries, I mean, Radoslav Sikorski, the foreign minister, said, clearly, we all talked about it many times, your level of fear of Russia depends on where you sit geographically. And that explains a lot of things. And about smaller countries, well, I wish, everybody would adopt Denmark's model and the Baltics model. It's not happening, and it has to happen in the United States. And I finish with, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, who's arguing that the West should allow long-range missile strikes deep into Russia. What missiles has Canada provided, long-range missiles, to Ukraine? Canada can't even spend more than 1% on its own defense, and has given a very insignificant amount of military aid to Ukraine, and that's despite the fact that they have 1.3 million Canadians out of 33 million of Canadian Ukrainian origin in Canada, which has a population of 33. So when you look at the West, there are a few bright spots, but unfortunately, they're the ones with the smaller economies and smaller budgets.
And there's a topic I'd like to sort of queue up potentially for our next discussion, and this is another thing which I think is not appreciated enough in the West. We are perhaps in many ways struggling to try and retain Russia as an imperial entity to prevent it from collapsing. And on this channel, there have been many discussions about the collapse of Russia. Ukrainians, of course, are wishing for that. Many are perhaps overly optimistic about the chances of that. But in the long historical context, I think it needs to be recognized that Russia is an imperial entity that is on a long, slow motion car crash of collapse in terms of demographics. Its model, its extractive industries really make no sense in the modern world. Its territory is in many ways too vast and ungovernable to create infrastructure. And as we mentioned there, as Peter Zeihan talks a lot, it's on a demographic down curve, which, of course, the war in Ukraine has accelerated. So we are faced with a collapsing empire. But just because that hasn't happened last Tuesday, just because the Russian economy is more resilient than we expected, does not mean that this is not a process that is unfolding for our eyes. And it's one that perhaps we are not doing anything to prepare for.
It was a good, yeah, I would love have us on every day if you want, Jonathan, as far as I'm concerned. But I close with two things. One is I would be very pleasantly surprised if Biden quietly allowed the deep strikes and unlike what the West has unfortunately done, not telegraphed it publicly. I think that's been one of the mistakes of the West all along, is to telegraph a lot of what it does or doesn't do publicly. And the other thing about demographics, listen, that's again an attritional thing. Ukraine's demographics are collapsing also. And we're not going to lose that war because they have, I mean, we're not going to come out ahead because Russia has now 4 times, maybe 5 times more people. Nobody knows how many people actually are in Ukraine at any given moment, but we've lost clearly a lot. And the birth rate is at its lowest ever since became an independent nation. And the last figures I read is there are 3 deaths per birth every day, per 1 birth in Ukraine, and that is not going well. The bright side is there are still, and this mobilization has shown, there's still 5 million Ukrainians of fighting age who are not in the war. So Ukraine still has plenty of people, plenty of soldiers. It needs to continue to have plenty of will and plenty of means, and this thing still can be won. And I'm a pessimist by nature, but I know this still can be won.
Michael, last word to you.
I basically have one sentence that I think it's a British sentence. I think it's time to shit or get off the pot for the West. Either we say to the Ukrainians, look, we are not really interested in helping you, and you need to take the Trump-Putin deal, or we actually go seriously into this. A friend of mine from Ukraine last night, after having heard that his cousin had just been killed at the front, wrote to me saying, all the money you talk about, all the victory you want to support, if you only done that a year or a year and a half ago and thrown that money and those resources, Putin would have been out of the Kremlin a long time ago. And I think this is the bitter thing. Brian talks about the long-range strikes. I'm not even sure by now that that's going to make much of a difference, because we've been talking about this for half a year now. And Putin is not that stupid. He's, as all intelligence shows, he's withdrawn 95% of the relevant weapons we could hit with those long strikes, unless we want to go and hit the Kremlin itself. And this is just one bitter example that we are too slow. We mumble and stumble too much, and we need to shit or get off the pot. It's time.
Well,
it's overdue.
Yeah, I agree. I'll build on that point. I mean, one last shot at Jake Sullivan. He's basically making the argument against deep strikes by saying Russia has moved, its targets out of strike range. Well, thank you, Jake Sullivan, because thanks to your, hesitation, they done and did it. So yeah, it's not going to be a game changer anymore, like so many of the other weapons that Ukraine gets slowly and in inadequate amounts.
And disingenuous as well, because as Ukraine has amply demonstrated, there are ammo dumps that can be hit. There are logistical sites that can be hit. There are rail tracks that can be hit. There are still plenty of targets, even if they've moved
Right.
the high value planes out of the way. It's always thrilling speaking to you guys, especially with your experience of Ukraine over many, many years, and the fact that you have connections with so many Ukrainians and have so many conversations. I think it's important to have that connection to reality. That connection to reality is a powerful way to counter Russian disinformation and the way it distorts and destroys or seeks to destroy reality as well. I look forward to the next conversation. Enjoy your holiday, Brian, before the security conference pitches you right back into the thick of things. And yeah, I look forward to the next time we get to catch up.
Thank you very much, Jonathan.
Thanks, Jonathan.